What if a single unstoppable shock erased 90% of the world's financial value? Not as a temporary crash, but as the end of the financial economy as we know it. For decades, the global economy has been built on fragile foundations. Inflated asset prices, historic levels of debt, and markets increasingly controlled by algorithms moving faster than human decision-making. Wealth exists more on screens than in reality, and confidence has become the most valuable currency of all. Now imagine that confidence vanishing in days, not years. Imagine a synchronized collapse across stocks, bonds, derivatives, and currencies. Too fast for intervention, too large to contain. This is not a story about a recession. This is not a familiar financial crisis. This is a global economy what-if scenario where the very mechanisms that once stabilized markets accelerate their destruction. High-frequency trading turns volatility into chaos. Liquidity disappears. Banks stop trusting each other. Pension systems dissolve into numbers without meaning. And the financial economy, once the engine of growth, becomes the epicenter of collapse. Stay with me until the end of the simulation, because what you are about to enter is an alternate economy shaped by fear, automation, and irreversible decisions. In this timeline, governments hesitate, while AI systems react instantly. Megacorporations move faster than nations, absorbing assets, data, and influence as judicial institutions lose control. The rules that define work, money, and value begin to fracture. Future predictions often assume gradual change. But history shows that systems rarely fall slowly. They break suddenly, then all at once. Maybe the scenario feels extreme. Maybe it feels impossible. Or maybe it's closer to reality than it seems, hidden beneath the surface of today's markets. What you're about to discover may change how you see financial stability, global power, and the future of human survival within complex economic systems. And it's exactly here, at the moment of impact, that this alternate timeline begins to take shape. If the simulation resonates with you, pause for a moment and tell me in the comments what stood out the most so far, or whether a collapse of this scale feels plausible in the world we're living in. Your perspective matters, because these alternate economy scenarios only gain depth when more minds question them together. And if this analysis adds value to how you think about the global economy, a simple like helps this kind of future-focused work reach others who are searching for serious, long-form economic what-if explorations. If you want to continue exploring alternate futures, financial collapse scenarios, and global economy what-if timelines shaped by AI, megacorporations, and systemic risk, consider subscribing. It's how this growing community stays connected to simulations that challenge conventional narratives and push future predictions beyond the obvious. Now, return your attention to the timeline. The shock has already hit. Markets are in freefall, and the first signals of breakdown are appearing in everyday life. This is where abstraction turns into lived reality, and where the earliest years of this alternate economic collapse begin to unfold. In the early years of this new reality, the world begins to fall apart. The fall in financial markets is rapid, almost frenetic, with stock exchanges losing 90% of their value in a matter of weeks. What once seemed secure and unshakable, homeownership, investments, retirements, dissolves in the face of cruel and inescapable reality. Savings disappear, banks collapse, and as financial systems disconnect, governments find themselves powerless to stop the collapse. The biggest blow is not financial, but psychological. The confidence that had sustained economies for generations melts away. Money as a concept seems to lose its power. The global economy, once interconnected and fluid, is now irreparably fragmented. The change isn't just in the numbers. People's lives are changing radically and rapidly. The streets, once markets of consumption and movement, are becoming spaces of struggle for survival. Unemployment is reaching unprecedented proportions, and consumption is becoming a distant memory. Daily life, which once revolved around shopping, travel, and financial security, is transforming into a constant struggle for basic resources. Cities are emptying out, and the movement of people is, in many cases, a search for shelter and food. In this scenario, governments attempt to react, but their response has become increasingly limited and desperate. With central banks unable to intervene adequately and the collapse of confidence in traditional financial systems, the alternatives that emerge are not simple. What we see in the streets is a reflection of the total disorganization and transformation of what was once the global economic structure. Megatech companies and megacorporations, previously relegated to a peripheral role, now emerge as the new centers of power. They not only survived the collapse, but emerge from this crisis with even greater strength, controlling information, resources, and, in many cases, even the flows of essential goods. Government reaction is slow and, in some cases, ineffective. In an attempt to avoid complete social collapse, states try to implement emergency measures, nationalizations, price controls, and attempt a stabilization through new digital or centralized currencies. However, these actions only generate more uncertainty. The loss of trust is irreversible, and power is now gradually being transferred to large corporations, which are beginning to position themselves as new corporate governments. These market giants, with their immense reserves of data and resources, not only maintain their empires intact, but also begin to dictate the rules of a new economic order. Now, I want to delve even deeper into the scenario, exploring the broader consequences of this global transformation. Over the course of the decade, the economy fragments completely. Entire nations are forced to rethink their position in the world, and new alliances begin to emerge. Countries with vital natural resources, or those with the infrastructure necessary to control emerging new technologies, such as artificial intelligence, become the new focus of global power. The global data market becomes more important than the commodities market, and countries with control over large information networks become the new superpowers. This new order is, in many respects, more decentralized and fragmented than before, but also more dangerous. With the collapse of the traditional financial system, new economic blocks are beginning to emerge. What was once an economy interconnected by global trade and finance networks is now divided into increasingly isolated zones of economic power, where economic superpowers are formed not only around natural resources, but also around control of data and artificial intelligence. The emergence of new AI-based superpowers, with the ability to control data networks and artificial intelligence, defines a power structure, completely changes the game. These nations and corporations not only dominate markets, but also global economic and political decisions. As the scenario unfolds, two extreme possibilities open up before humanity. On the one hand, we could see the emergence of an economy of abundance, driven by automation and artificial intelligence, which finally frees human beings from their most basic economic concerns. In this scenario, traditional work becomes obsolete and resources are distributed more equitably. Technology could provide everything we need: food, energy, healthcare, without the need for human intermediaries. The goal would no longer be profit, but collective well-being, with society divided not by wealth, but by access to knowledge and capacity to innovate. However, the scenario of abundance is not guaranteed. On the other hand, we have the extreme concentration of power. As corporate giants take control of the economy, society becomes even more polarized. A small elite, equipped with total control over essential resources and cutting-edge technologies, dominates the global mass that lives in an economy of dependency instead of freedom and opportunity. We see a closed system where resources are scarce and power is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few. Inequality becomes a reality as harsh and immutable as the air we breathe, and social mobility, once the dream of modern society, becomes a distant fiction. Now, if we pause and look at the social and human impact of this new economic order, the change is even more profound. It's not just about a crumbling financial system or a new division of power blocks. What's really at stake here is the transformation of human identity. Work, the definition of success, and the notion of purpose begin to disintegrate. When money and work are no longer the keys to survival, people begin to question what it truly means to live. In a scenario of abundance, human beings may break free from traditional economic pressures, but an existential crisis arises. What is the value of a human being in a world where production no longer depends on individual effort? In a scenario of concentration, the struggle for survival continues, but now it is marked by profound despair, a hopelessness that permeates human relationships. Trust in institutions, already shaken, completely crumbles, and the human journey becomes one of constant struggle for something increasingly intangible, meaning, purpose, a way to escape this closed system. And it is at this point, at the heart of this transformation, that the escape routes begin to disappear. Comment below, That makes sense to me. By the third year after crash, survival has replaced recovery as the primary objective of the global system. What initially looked like temporary emergency measures harden into permanent structures. Governments across the world suspend financial markets indefinitely, not to stabilize them, but to prevent panic from reigniting. Banks are nationalized in waves, deposits converted into controlled digital balances, withdrawals limited by algorithmic rules rather than human judgment. Money still exists, but it no longer behaves like money. It becomes permission-based access, managed and monitored in real time. In the streets, this shift is felt immediately. Digital rationing systems define how much energy, food, and mobility each household can access. The justification is stability, but the impact is psychological transformation. People begin to internalize limits not as temporary sacrifices, but as the new boundaries of existence. The collective mindset adapts, trading freedom of choice for predictability. Behind the scenes of this future, emergency power quietly becomes normalized power. At the same time, megacorporations move with a speed no government can match. While states debate legislation and public legitimacy, corporate systems simply execute. Smaller companies collapse or are absorbed, their assets folded into vertically integrated empires that control supply chains, data flows, and logistics. These megacorporations issue their own internal currencies, manage housing and healthcare for their workers, and deploy AI governance systems to optimize productivity and compliance. In practice, they begin to resemble city-states, quasi-nations operating across borders, loyal not to citizens, but to efficiency. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario, because over the next decade, the global map itself begins to change. Traditional alliances lose relevance as new blocks form around energy independence, semiconductor production, and artificial intelligence infrastructure. Power migrates away from financial centers and toward regions that can sustain closed-loop economic systems. Nations with sovereign AI, autonomous food production, and secure data networks become the new anchors of stability. Others fade into dependency, plugged into systems they no longer control. When this new order starts to stabilize, two extreme paths become visible. In one version of this alternate economy, automation and AI are leveraged to reduce scarcity. Basic needs are met universally, work becomes optional, and human effort shifts toward creativity, research, and exploration. This is the abundance economy, highly managed, but materially secure. In the other path, access replaces ownership entirely. Resources are abundant but controlled. A small technocratic elite designs the systems, while the majority live within predefined economic permissions. This concentration economy does not collapse. It calcifies. The deepest impact, however, is not structural. It's internal. As years pass, people stop measuring life through careers or accumulation. Routine is rewritten. Purpose becomes uncertain. Some find meaning in contribution and learning. Others feel erased by systems that no longer need their labor. The journey of humanity turns inward, grappling with the hidden truth of this future. When survival is automated, identity becomes the real scarcity. And it's precisely at this point, when the external chaos appears managed, but the internal questions grow louder, that the next layer of this timeline begins to reveal itself. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. As the timeline moves beyond the first chaotic years and into the second decade after the collapse, the world no longer feels like it's falling apart. Instead, it feels reassembled, deliberately, unevenly, and without nostalgia for what came before. Traditional financial hubs that once dictated the rhythm of the global economy begin to fade into irrelevance. Cities built around banking, speculation, and capital flows lose their strategic value in a world where markets are suspended and money is permission-based. What replaces them is something colder, more calculated, and far more structural. Along the way, power reorganizes itself around fundamentals. Energy security becomes destiny. Data becomes territory. And artificial intelligence becomes the core infrastructure of governance itself. New economic blocks emerge, not defined by ideology or currency, but by their ability to operate autonomously. Nations that control renewable energy grids, rare minerals, food production, and large-scale AI systems begin to stabilize while others drift into dependency. Borders still exist, But influence now flows through servers, algorithms, and supply chains rather than banks. Now I want to go even deeper into this scenario, because behind the visible map lies a hidden transformation. Sovereign AI systems are no longer tools. They are decision engines. They manage logistics, labor allocation, resource distribution, and even elements of social policy. Countries capable of training and securing their own AI models become the new superpowers, not through military dominance, but through optimization. These AI superpowers don't need open markets. They operate controlled economic zones, tightly regulated, internally efficient, and largely insulated from external shocks. Over time, the global economy fragments completely. Open trade gives way to negotiated access. Movement of people, capital, and information becomes conditional. The promise of globalization is replaced by managed interdependence. Some regions thrive inside these systems, while others exist on the margins, plugged into them without leverage. This is the backstage of the future few talk about. Stability achieved through restriction, resilience built on control. Within this framework, two extreme outcomes continue to diverge. In one path, AI-driven efficiency creates abundance. Scarcity is engineered out of food, energy, and basic services. Humans are freed from survival anxiety, and society reorients toward learning, exploration, and long-term thinking. In the other path, the same systems enforce concentration. Access is tiered. Opportunity is permissioned. A small class designs reality while the majority adapts to it. Both futures are technologically identical. The difference lies in decisions made quietly, early on. The deepest impact unfolds slowly. As years pass, routines lose their old meaning. Work is no longer a universal obligation. Identity detaches from productivity. Some people experience this as liberation, others as erasure. Mentality shift from ambition to navigation. How to exist inside systems you didn't choose but must understand. The journey becomes internal, shaped by revelations about control, dependence, and the hidden truths of this new order. And just when this world seems stable, almost normalized, a new question begins to surface beneath the surface. One that challenges who truly benefits from a perfectly managed future. Comment below. That makes sense to me. As this alternate timeline advances, something unsettling becomes clear. The same collapse, the same technologies, and the same decisions produce futures that could not be more different. In the years following a global reconfiguration, society does not move in a single direction. It splits, quietly at first, then unmistakably. Two economic realities begin to coexist, each claiming to be the logical outcome of the crash. In one version of this future, automation and AI are treated as public infrastructure rather than private leverage. Production becomes hyper-efficient. Energy grids self-optimize. Food systems are automated end-to-end, and basic services are detached from employment entirely. Over time, scarcity stops being the organizing principle of society. People receive what they need by default, not as charity, but as a structural feature of the system. This abundance economy changes the human journey at its core. Survival anxiety fades. Decisions are no longer driven by fear or collapse, but by curiosity, contribution, and long-term thinking. Work becomes voluntary, fluid, and creative. The impact is subtle but profound. When life is no longer a race, identity begins to expand. Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario, because abundance carries its own hidden truths. Without economic pressure, society must confront questions it once avoided. Purpose can no longer be outsourced to careers. Status can no longer be bought through accumulation. People are forced into an internal transformation, redefining meaning in a world where comfort is guaranteed but direction is not. Some thrive in this freedom. Others feel unanchored, exposed by a system that no longer tells them who they are. At the same time, another path unfolds elsewhere. In this version of the future, AI and automation are optimized not for distribution, but for control. Productivity soars, but access becomes conditional. Wealth concentrates into a narrow techno-elite that owns the systems, the data, and the rules. For everyone else, life stabilizes at a minimum viable level. Needs are met, but only just. Economic dependency becomes permanent, encoded into platforms and permissions. Upward mobility fades into memory. The collective mindset shift from ambition to compliance, from dreaming to adapting. Here, the transformation is quieter but heavier. People still work, but their work no longer leads anywhere. Routine replaces aspiration. The truth hidden in the backstage of this future is not poverty, but stagnation, a world where nothing collapses, yet nothing truly changes, where safety exists, but agency does not. As decades pass, the contrast between these realities sharpens. Both claim efficiency. Both claim stability. Both are born from the same crash. The difference lies in early decisions, who control the systems, who define fairness, and who is allowed to participate in shaping the outcome. And beneath it all, a deeper question begins to surface, one that neither abundance nor concentration can fully escape. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. When this new order finally stabilizes, the most profound transformation is no longer economic or technological. It is human. Years after crash, work quietly detaches from survival, not all at once and not everywhere, but decisively. Income is no longer the primary determinant of whether someone eats, has shelter, or access to energy. For the first time in modern history, large parts of humanity are no longer economically necessary in the traditional sense. And that realization changes everything. In the early years, this shift feels like relief. Stress levels drop. The constant pressure to compete, perform, and monetize every hour fades. But as time passes, a deeper impact begins to surface. Without work as a survival mechanism, the old markers of value start to dissolve. Job titles lose their power. Careers stop defining identity. The question, what do you do, no longer carries the weight it once did. In its place emerges a quieter, more unsettling question. Why are you here? Now I want to go even deeper into the scenario, because this is where the hidden truth of this future reveals itself. Societies begin to reorganize around new forms of status. Some cultures elevate contribution, teaching, mentoring, problem-solving, preserving knowledge. Others gravitate toward creativity, exploration, and intellectual production. And in more controlled systems, status is derived from proximity to decision-making power, data access, or system governance. Identity fragments. Purpose becomes personal, but also fragile. Daily routines change shape. Time stretches. Days are no longer structured around obligation, but around self-direction. For some, this opens space for growth and meaning. For others, it creates disorientation. Mental health becomes a central societal challenge, not because of scarcity, but because of excess possibility. The collective mentality shifts from survival to navigation, learning how to exist inside systems that provide everything except direction. Across generations, this transformation deepens. Children are no longer educated for jobs that don't exist. Instead, they are trained to adapt, to think systemically, to coexist with AI decision-makers. Culture becomes reflective, slower, more philosophical. But beneath this calm surface, a quiet tension remains. If humans are no longer needed to produce, what anchors their value? In concentrated systems, the answer is imposed. Purpose is defined externally. In abundance-oriented societies, the answer is open-ended. And that freedom carries its own weight. The journey of humanity turns inward, confronting questions that were postponed for centuries by economic urgency. Questions about meaning, agency, and belonging. And just as this internal shift becomes visible, a final realization begins to take shape. One that forces a re-examination of who designed the system, who benefits most from it, and whether this future was ever truly neutral. Comment below. That makes sense to me. As this simulation reaches its most revealing phase, one conclusion begins to crystallize. Not as an ending, but as a realization. A 90% crash does not simply erase wealth or reset markets. It rewrites the operating system of civilization itself. The rules that once governed value, trust, work, and power are quietly replaced not through consensus, but through urgency. In the first years, survival forced rapid decisions. Over the decade, those decisions hardened into systems. And when the new order finally stabilized, it carried the fingerprints of whoever had moved fastest when everything else froze. Now I want to go even deeper into this moment, because the real story of this future is not collapse, it's authorship. Behind every automated rationing system, every sovereign AI, every controlled economic zone, there were choices made under pressure. Choices about openness versus control, about distribution versus concentration, about whether efficiency should serve humanity or humanity should adapt to efficiency. The hidden truth of this future is that the crash did not determine the outcome. The response did. In some regions, rebuilding became an opportunity to correct structural imbalances that had existed for generations. In others, it became a justification to lock them in permanently. Liberation and domination emerged from the same starting point, separated only by governance, transparency, and who was allowed inside the decision loop. The impact of those early choices echoes through every layer of society, from global power structures down to individual identity. As people look back on the old world, nostalgia fades. The question is no longer whether the previous system could have been saved. It's whether it was ever stable to begin with. The journey forward is shaped less by technology than by collective mentality, by what societies believe humans are for in a world where survival can be automated and control can be optimized. This is where the future of the global economy quietly diverges, not at the peak of the crash, but in the silence immediately after, in the rooms where rules were rewritten while the world was distracted by fear. And as this alternate timeline continues to unfold, one unresolved question lingers beneath everything we've seen so far. Who truly benefits from a perfectly rebuilt system, and who simply learns to live inside it? Comment below. That makes sense to me. If you stayed until this moment, it means the simulation spoke to something deeper than numbers and charts. This channel exists precisely for that reason, to explore what if economy scenarios, alternate futures, and serious future predictions about the global economy, without shortcuts or noise. If this way of thinking resonates with you, subscribing is simply a way to stay connected to these long-form simulations as they continue to unfold. If you want to leave a trace that you made it all the way through this journey, write in the comments, "This future really made me think." It helps shape the next simulations and shows that this kind of deep economic exploration matters. And if this analysis helped you see the future of the economy from a new angle, a like quietly pushes this work toward others who are searching for the same clarity. There's another simulation right here that connects directly with this one. Another alternate timeline, another economic future branching from similar decisions. Click and keep going with me there.